Suzanne Fournier, you've been with the NFU in New Brunswick since 2018. You're the executive director. You hold a degree in political science from Carleton University, live in Western New Brunswick, and your role as small-scale agriculture advocate, sustainable family-run agriculture, and focusing on policies and strengthening local food systems and protecting farmland. Your strong voice for agroecology, food sovereignty, and often represent farmers in policy discussions on land access, market challenges, and environmental protection. And your leadership emphasizes farmer empowerment, inclusion of women and young farmers, and long-term agricultural sustainability in the province.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest things, actually, I worked for a nonprofit a couple of years ago, and one of the biggest things I didn't like was we were beholden to our donors.
Okay.
Mostly grants and mostly the government, basically,
Right.
which is when you're trying to make policy change, really hard to do because you don't want to upset people, you don't want to piss people off.
Right.
And that's something that the NFU is not really beholden to, that because you are for the farmers and supported by the farmers.
That's right.
So speak a little bit about what the National Farmers Union is and why it's important.
So the NFU was created as an act of parliament in 1969. And the essential boiled down work that we do is promoting agroecology and fighting corporate control in the food system. So we are Canada's largest direct voluntary farm member organization. And that means that our members drive our work. We do get grants for projects, but our revenues comes from our memberships.
Where does that, I often have this weird feeling when everybody says like corporate control or talk about corporations, because technically I own a corporation.
Sure, yeah.
And like, what is the sliding scale there? We're like small farm that's a corp versus a large scale farm that's sort of monopolizing a industry.
Yeah, so where we kind of draw the line is around multinational corporations. We tend not to take money from anyone that has a business unless it's a direct sponsorship, for example, for our convention. But again, we would not accept multinational money. But, you know, we often get asked to advertise or promote certain products that are, you know, for small scale growers by small businesses, and we do decline those as well. It's not to say that we don't support them and that, you know, our members don't use them, but that's not where our revenue comes from.
It allows you to remain impartial while trying to advocate, because
Exactly.
you can't really say that you are impartial when you're trying to like, oh, here, we'll palm these off on some business.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I have more questions and more notes. I just need to make sure I can get them here. I had the former, I guess Margaret Johnson was here a few weeks ago. We talked about how self-sufficient and food sovereign New Brunswick is, and the numbers are pretty abysmal. Like she said, it was 7 to 9%. How can we change that? How can we focus on actually getting food to stay at home?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? So it's about 7% for fruits and vegetables. It's higher if you're looking at some of our meat production. Obviously, supply managed products are, you know, pretty self-sufficient. There's a lot of pieces. So the NFU takes a holistic systems-based approach. We are not going to fix sustainability, self-sufficiency, food sovereignty, unless we address a whole host of problems. So I can be very broad here, but, you know, I think the biggest issues facing New Brunswick in retaining as much of our food production, we have a government, both federally and provincially, very, very focused on the export market. That's a big problem. They are putting more money and more grants and more subsidies into the businesses who are monoculture and focused on selling those products overseas.
I've noticed that a lot recently.
But it's not recent. That's not new. There was a great article in Ageless, New Brunswick a few months ago about the Woodstock Farmers Market and how that was set up. And they were talking about 30 years ago, the government focus was on export, was not on local food. And they were trying to make a change to keep some of that food production here and the access point here. Nothing has changed in 30 years, really. That still is the focus. So we need a shift from the government perspective and from the public perspective on, we're not saying we're going to stop all exports. That would be insane. But we need to be more realistic about the lands that we use, that we are farming, and driving more of that food production into food that people can eat here. But farmland is also a big piece of that because we're losing a lot of farmland. So we need farmland protection programs. I'm a big advocate for getting FLIP done. We've been talking about it for 5 years. It just needs to be finished, at least to have that as a base level to protect farmland. But suburban sprawl and industrial development is a huge encroachment on farmland. And that also plays into the factors of why new young farmers are not starting up, because farmland access is such a barrier. It's such a huge cost. And then depending on what commodity or crop you're trying to grow, if we're talking fruit trees, that's 5-10 years before you see any return on investment. So there are so many pieces, on self-sufficiency that could be done, policies that could be done to change, how we're keeping the amount of food. The other piece that I think is really important in New Brunswick that doesn't get a lot of airtime is local procurement. Our local procurement policies are totally hidden. I don't know what they are.
What do you mean by local procurement?
So local procurement is when government or institutions access products, and specifically we're talking food and beverage, from their region or local area. So that would be hospitals, universities, other government institutions, putting their dollars, because they are buying food, schools, they're providing lunch programs, but most of that is not done within the province, and most of it's not done with New Brunswick products.
You mean Cisco isn't local?
Chartwell's out of Toronto?
Are there any international examples of, I guess I haven't researched it enough, but are there any international examples of countries that are food sovereign and are really doing a good job at this?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing I would say is, for context, North America is very, very strange. We think of ourselves as a standard. We are so unusual in our food system. I would suspect and have read, it's really a hangover from World War II. From we had a lot of money coming in post-war. We also had a workforce shift where a lot of women were working outside of the house. That, and I mean, just the nature of North America, which is very large and spread apart, and rural. Also our seasons, but our food system is really strange. Most of the rest of the world do not buy their food once a week or once a month. They're buying fresh food every day from local access points. So let's start with that framing. Like, we're weird. This is not.
That's such a novel concept for Canadians and Americans.
Exactly. This is not the norm. So if you look at places like Spain or Italy, they're doing a really good job of local food access points, of keeping their farmers growing, of doing agriturismo type work, of agritourism, where you have maybe a restaurant on a farm using the farm products. I think it was Barcelona recently decided to invest in having farmers markets per every 5 kilometers in the city. So that means anyone should be able to walk to or access a farmer's market easily. We're not doing that. Not even close, right? So, there are countries doing a really good job. Now, Europe also has significant subsidies for its farmers that Canada will not consider. But, the whole ecosystem in the rest of the world is functioning a lot better.
I've really noticed in even my adult life, I guess, I wasn't paying attention as much as a kid, but in my adult life, the shift towards monetary benefit as our primary focus as a society. Like, and that's something that Sarah and I talked about a couple years ago, was capitalism focusing on making a dollar, and then that has really bled into farming systems where if you can centralize it and you can get your highest yield for as cheap as possible, that has been a focus in agriculture, which is becoming a problem. And so I've become a huge advocate of, like, okay, if we had food systems every 100 kilometers, if we had small farms, and there's a farmer out of Quebec, J.M. Fortier, that I've spoken to him about it, and the same thing, that he's a huge advocate for. If everybody had a small farm, nobody would go hungry. So the quality of food in that type of system is dwindling. Why is that?
The quality? I mean, I believe there's research on the nutritional value of monoculture type crops, especially that are shipped from elsewhere. I mean, we know there's such a huge benefit to our digestive systems to be eating, you know, that the concept of the 100-mile diet, or, you know, 100-kilometer for Canadians. You know, there is a real benefit to eating food that is grown locally to you, because the soil, the allergens, all of those things factor in. I mean, I think when you look at monoculture farming as well, the soil is not being as replenished. They're not taking, you know, crop rotations or complex rotations into their systems, which means that they're having to just add more and more, you know, fertilizer or pesticides, herbicides to make that land productive, rather than, you know, having potatoes one year, maybe cattle grazing another year, fallow, you know, that really increases your soil health and nutrition, and then that goes back into the crops that you're growing.
I really have a hard time. It's such a hard conversation to have, because you end up, all food was grown on a farm somewhere.
Yes.
And so if you are talking ill of some type of food, well, somebody's going to be upset because, oh, that was grown on our family farm. But so quickly it becomes a conversation of, well, why was it grown as cheaply as possible and as quickly as possible? Because no farmer wants to put in extra inputs that they don't need. But to be able to implement those systems that require more regenerative practices and is difficult, and is that what's leading to consolidation and corporatization of the food system?
I wouldn't say it's leading to it. I'd say that small farms are having a harder time because of it. I think it's a cause and effect thing that, you know, especially if you look at meat production that is factory farm, you know, I think we can agree that factory farming is not a good practice for just about everyone involved. You know, and
what would be the classification of a factory farm?
Anything that Cargill touches. I mean, really, you know, like in New Brunswick, we don't even have federally inspected abattoirs. So, you know, I don't think you have to worry about meat produced in New Brunswick, you know, being factory farmed, unless you're buying it from a grocery store where it's been shipped in from who knows where. You know, I think we look at that scale of production as a driver. So within corporate concentration, what happens is big companies conglomerate, or they consolidate. So you're putting more and more power into the hands of one group, but also more of the market share. So they start to dictate the prices. And that's really where small farmers have a hard time edging into that, because they have no say. They have absolutely no choice if they buy fertilizer from Nutrien or not, because they are the only ones selling. So, you know, I think it's greed that has driven us to large agribusiness style, but also this focus on exports and high yields from our government has driven us into this very narrow path of where we're seeing these massive farms, and where small farmers are having such a hard time.
Is there an easy way to apply legislation or regulations to be able to fix that? Because the language, because I even thought about it recently with regards to New Brunswick. It was like, okay, if we put 100% tariffs on stuff coming in, then that would really focus. I mean, you'd sort of crash the system to start with, but that would really put a focus on being able to be self-sufficient and have New Brunswick producers, and then we can focus on exports.
Right.
But that's a hard conversation to have because then you have people losing their jobs from these big companies, and that's scary.
Yeah.
So is there sort of a stepwise solution that either the NFU has thought about or somebody else has thought about with regards to moving in that direction, sort of like Italy or like Europe, and educating people?
There isn't an easy answer for sure. One of the pieces that we look at and advocate for and, regularly present to the Parliament Agriculture Committee is around that Competition Bureau. The Competition Bureau is supposed to act when there is 65% a CR ratio. So that's, when you have 4 or more companies concentrated in one sector. Most of Canada's agriculture corporations own over 70% of the market. So the Competition Bureau needs to be acting and doing their job in order to prevent this over concentration. Now, we consider the market concentrated when it's over 40%. So we're really beyond where is a fair competitive market in most sectors of the agriculture business in Canada. That's step one.
That's I didn't know the Competition Bureau existed.
Yep.
But I think you see that in multiple industries. I mean, you look at telecoms, even you've got Bell, Roger,
Absolutely.
you've got a few big players.
Absolutely.
And then people, I think at the bottom of the totem pole, you often hear people complaining about like these oligopolies and these monopolies. I mean, the bread fixing scandal that happened a few years ago.
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
that is a huge problem and continues to be a huge problem, apparently.
Yeah.
So how do we get them to do their jobs?
I mean, that's the question, right? But that is the work that the NFU does, is we are constantly pushing, we are constantly advocating, we are constantly having meetings, we are constantly writing reports around, where the pinch points are and what can be done to be changed. And I mean, that's definitely number one, is making the Competition Bureau more competitive. There is something else that the NFU does, which I'm just going to check my notes because I don't remember off the top of my head. Corporate concentration is page 9. Providing avenues to build the power of farmers through collective marketing agencies. That's the second piece. So if you take supply management, for example, we are big proponents of supply management. That has kept those 5 crops or commodities, stable. I'm not going to say, all of our chicken and dairy farmers are, doing better than most small farms, but it has at least kept both the market stable, but their income stable. And if we have agencies that have real power to help limit that, concentration in the market, help advocate for the farmers, the NFU has spent many, many years and much more, than my experience on the Canadian Grain Board. That was part of the reason we were founded in 1969, was around grain issues. So when we have these agencies to monitor and respond and advocate for farmers, that's also a big piece of the chain in keeping that corporate concentration under control.
How does supply management work?
Okay, back to the notes, because it's just not something I have memorized. It applies to dairy, broiler chickens, laying hens, turkeys, and hatching eggs across Canada. And it was designed to solve multiple problems. So perishable products, especially like milk, were at the mercy of processors who knew they could pressure farmers into accepting lower prices because the alternative was a spoiled product that was good for no one. And if an individual farmer tried to compensate for low prices by producing more, the result was a market glut that further depressed the prices. So often in that case, the solution was to dump milk. Processors could also threaten to refuse delivery and lower prices by encouraging competition among producers. allowing the price to be set by the most desperate farmer. Consumers were subject to this price volatility, erratic supplies, seasonal shortages, and it was difficult to ensure consistent quality, and farmers just couldn't rely on fair return for their efforts and investment. So right now, our supply management system sits on 3 pillars: production discipline, which ensures that farmers produce no more or no less than the market needs. That's not without its challenges, and we can talk about what's going on with eggs. Cost of production pricing, which ensures that farmers receive a fair income. And import controls, which provide for predictable and adequate supply. And that's where we talk about tariffs and, how much product we're bringing in from outside of the country in addition to our own supply.
Because I've heard in the last number of years people complain about the supply management system because it's difficult either to get into it.
Absolutely.
Or difficult to, for somebody outside of, I guess just difficult to get in and to get a piece of that market share.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone in the industry. It is a very tight ship. And some of that works really well because it has to. It's definitely a challenge we've seen, especially in New Brunswick, around pasture-raised poultry. And so we have been working with the feather boards to try to find, pilot projects or ways where small farmers can gain a little bit more than the quota rate, or like than their, pasture rates. It's 99 hens, that anyone can have without, being part of the quota system, to get above that so that their farming efforts are profitable. But then not actually being regulated by the quota system. So we've had a lot of conversations around that. We're not the only province. Quebec, Ontario does a lot of this as well. It's about finding the numbers that, farmers can have on farm to, whether it's a mixed operation or whether that's all they're doing, to still earn income, but, they're not jeopardizing how quota sits and, balances.
It seems like the language in some of these bills is almost archaic in the way that our system, especially since, COVID, since the last 5 or 6 years, things have ramped up and changed so dramatically. Yeah. So that language in those bills and those systems really needs to be changed to allow for better adoption and better, even with regards to climate change and climate resiliency. Absolutely. Because small farmers have the ability better to shift and move 100%. And do different things. Mm-hmm. So how is the NFU advocating for those sort of changes or those sort of adaptations?
When it comes to climate change, for example, we have, I think, one of the longest standing histories on advocating for awareness and fear genuinely around climate change and what's happening. There's a really great report that we did in 2019 called Tackling the Farm Crisis and the Climate Crisis. It's available at nfu.ca for free. And basically, we're at the point of no return when it comes to the climate. So our strategy is we need COVID level response from the government on, we need to stop the warming now. We need to stop this in its tracks. We need shifts in all of our systems in order to slow this down, because we're going to be dealing with unimaginable circumstances. We're already seeing more extreme weather events. And as you say, we are fully in support that the small farmers are the most adaptable to those. They are, the easiest to pivot when something changes, but they still need help. They still need emergency preparedness programs. They still need support and crop insurance when something like Hurricane Fiona hits very suddenly. We've had very, very lucky hurricane season this year. Fiona was a very near miss for us. That is not always going to be the case. I moved home the year that Arthur hit. That alone is needing more and better and thoughtful responses to mitigate climate, but also drought and wildfires that we had last year or this year. We need to be more aware and more ready for those things. But that does require a lot from the government to be assisting and supportive of when, shit hits the fan.
What does that support look like? Because like I mentioned, the language in these bills, and even here with regards to us, like technically we can't farm our land because of how close we are to a water course.
Sure.
But then thinking about climate resiliency and thinking about friends of ours who are not so close to water, and this year with how bad it was, we were only fortunate to be able to water our garden with the proximity that we have to the water course. So that language in those bills makes it complicated without being uber specific. So how do we go about getting those changed? Is that something that we get written up as an organization to say here to our local MPs or MLAs to get that changed? Or is that something that you just need to advocate for and hope that it happens?
There's a bit of both. I mean, we take very strong stance on mining, for example, because of the environmental impact. And, looking forward at what climate change is doing and plus where we're already at, that's something we're very wary of. We are very good friends with Mining Watch Canada. In terms of, changing the language, I will say, as much as I think we are not responding enough or quickly, the Department of Agriculture is currently working on a climate action plan for agriculture. So there are things in the works to try to, as you say, shift the language and understand where we are actually at today, versus maybe where things were 20 years ago that are very, very different. I expect it won't go far enough for us. Nothing usually does, but it's at least a starting point that we can push further.
And it's hard because you see sort of blanket approaches. I mean, the most recent example would be the carbon tax that was applied sort of as a blanket approach where, yes, farmers could apply for that back, and there was different ways to go around that. But as small organizations, that ends up being more cost prohibitive to them because then you have to have somebody on staff to be able to write that or to be able to have an accountant to be able to account for all of those things. So as much as we try to advocate for the smaller producer, it just becomes more difficult because you don't have access to those resources to be able to do it.
Sure.
So how do we then figure out that? I guess we're trying to solve so many problems all at once.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of things that personally I believe that a lot of it could be solved by the diversification of farms and really focusing on if we could feed everybody. And I wish really that we could move more towards more small farms rather than the corporatization. So is that a culture?
Exactly.
Is that a culture change that needs to happen, or is that something that just is a PR thing that we need to keep rolling out and educate people about the benefits of small scale?
It's a bit of both. I mean, if you look at what COVID did for our food system, it's a really good example of how overnight buying power shifted and perception shifted. No local food and beverage program, no buy local strategy that I have ever seen come across any province has done what COVID did for people rethinking where their supply chains are, rethinking where their food access points are. It was incredible. And I mean, if you talk to any of our butchers and abattoirs, their demand just spiked overnight. And I don't think they've slowed down much since then. Unfortunately, a lot of the other buying has shifted back to grocery stores and I mean, especially for cost of living and inflation reasons. We can talk more about that. Depends where you're buying from and who you're buying from and how accessible your food is. But, a lot of times local food can be as reasonable as grocery store prices. But there's a lot of accessibility points that factor into that. I think public perception is a big part of it. And it is, again, even this year, looking at the tariffs and what's going on in the United States, people are starting to check the labels of where their things come from again and question, it's very complicated with our relationship with the United States, especially in food processing, because you might have tomatoes grown in Aurelia that are shipped to New York State for processing and then brought back to Canada to can. It's a very cross-border system. So even to say something is a product of Canada is not, it's not straightforward. For our point of view, the only way that you can get something that is Canadian 100% is to buy it from your primary producer. That is the way that you can guarantee you are buying Canadian. So, yes, there is a public perception piece. I think in that diversification and food sovereignty or self sufficiency, it's also government. Our government needs to step back from that export focus. And because that's driving a lot of that monoculture and making it harder for young farmers to get started, or not even young, but new farmers. We have lots of folks coming, as newcomers to Canada who I think would like to start farming, but land is such a barrier, as we talked about. So the government has a real piece to play in that, but how the public buys and regards farmers, I think, is also a big piece.
It's interesting to talk about the necessity of regulation and more legislation, because on the flip side of that, there is also detriment to smaller producers and things like raw milk and dairy being illegal. And there's a lot of smaller producers, like for even us, if we wanted to set up our little bakery, we make sourdough for the market. Well, the regulations for us to make sourdough to bring it to the market versus the exact same stuff for us to sell at the farm stand, we can't sell it. So it's almost like we need two things to happen. We need the government to move quicker and change things faster, which they never do, but then also be able to be more lenient on smaller producers, but then be more strict on larger producers.
Yeah, it's complicated. I mean, I would say in terms of the regulations, I think, so a few weeks ago, I was part of a session with the Department of Agriculture around the local food and beverage strategy, but also the new agriculture growth plan that they're working on. And regulations came up a lot in that conversation. And I think what the outcome of that conversation was, it's not necessarily about reducing the regulations, but it's about making them easier to step through. It's about having government staff who can be available, know what you need to do, and when and where and who to contact, and have all of the steps really easily laid out and accessible, but also not intensively cost, so subsidies available if you are trying to upscale or, take that leap from one market to another, to make that transition easier for small scale growers. So I think that's kind of where we would sit on, it's not necessarily about getting rid of the regulations, but how do we make them easier to navigate? What resources can we put towards going through the process, but then also subsidies to make it easier to do, especially if you need new infrastructure or, new equipment to make that possible.
Is that part of the issue with one hand not talking to the other when it comes to federal government and provincial government and then municipal governments? Like, there's so many hands in the pot of trying to change things that it just doesn't work because there is too many hoops?
Yeah, it's definitely a problem. I think one of the challenges that came up during that meeting was around CFIA regulation for someone with a sea buckthorn business and wanting to, really change their market access to maybe a global market or at least a much more Canadian market, and how the gap between the CFIA regulations and the provincial regulations were massive, but also, there was kind of no consideration on a step or a level up. It was just a jump or a leap. So, for them, it was, if we do what we need to do in order to get the CFIA regulations, we're going to be at the same level as any gigantic business, with that same export or Canadian market. So I think, that it is true. I think, there could be better communications between the government levels. I mean, even within government, we see a lot of silos still happening. They are aware of it and sometimes really actively try to break those barriers down, but sometimes it doesn't work. I think one of the other things that we've seen and heard recently is the challenges around, even within, let's say, the Department of Agriculture, which are hugely supportive of the industry, but maybe what if you knock on one door asking for help or information about a particular type of program, if that person doesn't know, they'll just say, no, sorry, there's nothing, and not refer you to the right person because they don't know where it is. So I think, there's a lot of in-house red tape too that could be alleviated to make things easier for producers. They shouldn't have to knock on every door to find what they're looking for. And, if someone tells them, no, there's no program like that, they're going to believe them. They're not going to keep digging necessarily. So, I think that's also a piece of the puzzle that could be easier to solve.
That's something I've heard. Actually, a former MLA told me that the bureaucracy underneath of all of the government, like the government officials and politicians that you see, are the figurehead and the face of all of these things that are awesome, usually, and great people to talk to, but then it's the inefficiencies of systems that runs underneath the surface that even we've been dealing with lately. That I think it was 2 or 3 months ago, I emailed our local rep to figure out just exactly what you said, figure out something. They didn't know the answer. They said, oh, I'll ask my guy. I still haven't heard back.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so for us to try to move forward or want to move forward with a business to make money, okay, I'm at a standstill with the government, because if I move ahead and then 6 months down the road they tell me, oh, sorry, you couldn't do that, you now need to walk back.
Yeah.
That's a scary thing for any business, especially a business that relies on a commodity that is largely perishable.
Yeah, I mean, it is such a problem. And I think, the other thing that we really struggle with our provincial government is around communications. It's one thing if the department doesn't know, necessarily what programs or resources are available, but they do a terrible job communicating that to farmers, to the public, of the work that they're doing or what's available. They rely on us, the general farm organizations, to do it, and we are happy to do it. But, how many emails do you open a day, right? You can't effectively communicate one big thing from one point. You need multiple access points. And I mean, even when we're doing our membership renewals, we have a 5-point communication strategy to remind our members to renew. The government is not doing that. And I think they would be so much more effective in the work that they're doing and the uptake of their programs if they spent a little bit of more of their resources in really communicating that with the farmers. I mean, one of the things that we have suggested is anyone who signs up for a new farm business registry gets an information packet about programs available, New Brunswick loans, all of the pieces that come into the farm that they have all that information, but why are we not giving that to the farmers in a really easy, manageable way, not just say, go look at a website?
Especially with the systems that are available, because anytime you communicate or try to communicate with government, they tell you that those systems are there. Grants are available. There are things that you can do. Yeah. I'm still waiting on an email back. I was supposed to interview the current Minister of Agriculture, and his team has yet to email me back. Yeah. He was happy to give me a half hour here in studio, but it has yet to happen. Sure. Coming in Christmas season, I doubt I'll see him. But yeah, it's very difficult. The PR of any government system, whether it's liberal, conservative, whatever, especially with changing media, it seems like the old hats continue to be in charge and try to use the old systems of, oh yeah, here's the PDF that you can check out. We'll just make a Facebook post about that. And this, it's moved so fast over the past few years that in order to educate and to roll things out, even with regards to any type of changes or plans, it just doesn't happen overnight or via a Facebook post or one.
And I mean, I occasionally see Government of New Brunswick ads on, games or other stuff online that I'm like, you know how to do it, but is what you're doing effective? A lot of them are around health, which is great. I mean, we have a huge problem with health in New Brunswick, but, I just think the tools are available. There's also challenges with the government structure on how they hire people and how quickly they can bring people in or create a job position. And I mean, that takes a lot of time. we are getting, for example, a new climate change specialist within the Department of Agriculture, but that's taken about 2 years. So, some of it is their processes, are so slow and are not keeping up with, as you say, the rate of how we communicate and the tools that we use.
It's funny, my grievance is the opposite. Not how quickly they hire, but how quickly they should get rid of people.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's
That's
another factor.
And that's the biggest thing. Whenever anybody talks about government, they rarely mean they don't like politicians. If they don't, they don't like what they're talking about. But it's the underneath. Like I went to SNB a couple weeks ago, and it's just, I even talked to the teller at the desk, and she was like, I hate it here. Like, this sucks. And so the bureaucracy and anything to get going and try to figure it out, despite how much we are taxed, to be able to, okay, let's get this going. Let's move forward. And I think it's that fear, especially for a lot of young farmers, not just the financial, but then the regulatory issues that they have to jump through and those hoops that just like, look, it's so much easier for me to go get a call center job and make the same amount of money as I would trying to shill carrots at the Boyce Farmers Market on the weekend.
Sure, yep, sure.
It's a frustrating system.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, within, that's it. I mean, at the end of the day, it really is the bureaucrats that we work with the most and that, are the focus of the policy. At the end of the day, they're the ones writing it. They're the ones researching it. There are differences with the political will, depending on who's in power, on how much money goes to the department and what kind of focus they have on food security. It was not mentioned, for example, in our budget this year at all. But
really?
No. I was at the lock-in, the budget lock-in. It wasn't in the throne speech.
We don't care about feeding people?
Not at a level that is comparable to priorities around health, for example, which I have a problem with. But that's also not just this government. That was the same with the last government. I mean, it's not like this is new. But that comes back to that perception piece. So, I mean, there is a trickle down in terms of, each government. So the premier will give each minister a mandate letter and, tell them, here are the files that you're working on. And, in agriculture, that tends to be pretty slim. So we're kind of in existence. They keep going at, kind of a snail's pace, but they're not getting the focus or the awareness to build.
So what can either small producers like myself or just the general public do to help move things along, make some change to make things a little bit easier and help reduce food insecurity? Because we're seeing record food bank usage. Yeah. We're seeing massive health crises with regards to, I would assume that part of your, I guess we didn't mention it, the mask and your immunocompromised. I would presume that that has to do with your desire for advocacy for good food for people.
Yeah, it all plays in. I mean, I have Crohn's disease. I have a digestive disorder. Food is such a massive part of how I navigate the world and my life now. So I mean, yeah, it's all linked. It's all tied together. Like I said, you can't look at one piece of the system without thinking of another piece of the system. What can the public do? Like I said, whenever and wherever you are able, buy local. Buy from your primary producers, whether that's the CSA, whether that's at your farmers markets. So we produce a biannual map of all of the farmers markets in the province. Those are available at all of the markets, tourism information centers, and public libraries across the province. So they're really easily to find, the printed copies. You can also get it online. Or just farm stands, direct access points. Food for All had been doing a pretty good map a few years ago of where those were. I think their resources have not been able to maintain that. The other place that I would suggest people could look if they're looking at independent food access points is Alt Grocery. Is a pretty good website that offers free listings that people can self-identify of farmers markets, independent grocery stores, other, other access points that are part of that big five corporate, control. Farmers, keep going. Don't give up hope. At the end of the day, we live in a political system that does not function as well as it should, but your vote matters. We do a lot of work with Fair Vote Canada, and Food Secure Canada does a great, campaign, especially around the federal election, on what the platforms cover for agriculture and food security. Vote for people who put people over profit. And we are nonpartisan. I won't tell you how to vote, but consider that when you're voting at any level, municipal, provincial, or federal. And, join the NFU, because that's the work that we do. Your membership dollars. And so in New Brunswick, most of our members are through the Farm Business Registry. It's a sliding scale based on gross farm income for your yearly fee. But the entirety of that fee comes to us. The government hands it over. They don't retain anything. So when you pay it at Service New Brunswick, that entire fee comes to us if you choose us as your farm organization. And that's the work that we do, is trying to push and advocate. And, part of our accreditation that we maintain every 4 years is providing government feedback. We have to do that. It's a requirement. So I write endless feedback. The most recent one I did was on the Clean Air Act. But we've also been requested for feedback on the National Action Plan to end gender-based violence. Pesticide herbicide use from our New Brunswick Standing Committee on Climate Change and Environmental Stewardship. All the pieces of the agriculture puzzle, we're involved in, we're aware of, we're active, and we are trying so hard to make small farms, our primary sources of food production, and to keep them going as long as we can, because that's the sustainable long-term system. And I think that's the other failure of large agribusiness and monoculture. They're not looking 50 years down the road. They're not looking 100 years down the road, but we are.
Yeah, they're looking to the next quarter to make
as
much money and yield as possible.
Exactly, yeah.
Whereas small producers are like, hey, I want to feed my grandkids off of these trees that I'm planting.
Exactly, exactly.
Awesome. Suzanne, thank you so much. I appreciate this. Hopefully this will reach enough people to be able to make a difference, because I think it's an important topic to be able to bring awareness that there is a way to change, and you don't need to sort of lie and wait for something to happen. We can actually do something about it.
Can I add one thing before we wrap up? Yeah. So one of the pieces that the NFU is really focused on is farm income. And I mentioned it, it's part of that tackling report. That's the farm income crisis. What I really want to make clear is how dire the situation is, because I think most consumers don't understand how hard it is to farm from a profitability standpoint. So we do yearly analysis on farm cash receipts, which is gross farm revenue. So that is the money that farmers earn after they sell their products. About 50 years ago, from the 1950s to the mid 80s, farmers retained 50% of every dollar they earned. Last year in New Brunswick, it was -1%. And yet we had a record-breaking year for farm cash receipts. More and more of the money that farmers create is being siphoned off. And 95% of where that's going is input use. It's fertilizer, it's chemicals, synthetic chemicals. It's also to banks. So that's where we really need to be watching and aware of how that corporate concentration is affecting, because that's who's taking that money. Our farmers are profitable. They know how to run a business, but they're not able to keep that money. They have to pay their bills. And so that's a real challenge for us. I mean, last year was a particularly bad year. It's not usually that low. 7% is where we've kind of hovered for the last 5 years. I know it's horrible. PEI was 4, 2018. And New Brunswick's not alone. It's a Canada-wide problem. But we really need to be aware, and this is why we advocate for buying directly from your farmers, because they're able to keep more of that money in their pocket than, you know, a grocery store taking.
Do you have more of those statistics? Let's take a quick break, and we're gonna jump into some financial numbers, because that.
I know, I'm sorry. It's so bad. But
okay.
I can't not talk about it.
Yeah, we're gonna take a break.
Okay.
You got this far in the episode, so you should consider joining our Patreon. You can join either as a free or a paid subscriber. I prefer paid, of course, but over there you can interact with other members of the community. It's better than your Facebook, your Instagram, your YouTube. You don't have to be beholden to the algorithm. You can get emails. When we send out these episodes, we can give you updates. You can ask questions that I would ask of my guests here. Go to patreon.com/homegrown show, where you can interact a little easier. We can have conversations. You can suggest guests that should be on the next episode, because I want you to have a say. And otherwise, I don't get paid for doing this. If you want to support me, go to patreon.com/homegrown show. You can support us directly right there. It's a cheap option to be able to support. If you enjoy these episodes, do it. Support it. Or at least just join as a free member so you can support us by continuing to listen to or watch these episodes. Back to the show. I was ready to wrap up. I completely neglected to, you dropped a bombshell on me before we took the break. That is a huge problem. The middlemen in the business, which I don't know why I completely neglected to talk about. The supply system from farmers goes through many different steps, many different hands. And like you mentioned, the buying direct from farmer is your best way to skip all of those steps and those middlemen. So remind us again what you said. How much did farmers make last year?
In New Brunswick in 2024, realized net income, which is what farmers retain, the percentage of the dollar after they pay all of their bills, was -1%. Farmers in New Brunswick paid to farm last year. And I can actually share a graph with you that charts the last almost 100 years of farm income in the province and how much it has shifted, how much the gap between gross farm revenue and realized net farm income has grown.
So I went to the grocery store yesterday to buy a few random things that we need, because you still got to go grocery store.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
And I took a walk through the produce aisle, which I never do because we grow so much of our own food, and I was just looking at the price of things. And if you factor in how much the farmer made from that, because how many hands does it go through from farm to grocery store? Like your Mega, Loblaws, Sobeys, like how many hands does that go through?
Oh gosh, I don't even know. I mean, I think it would depend on the product and where it's coming from. I mean, I'll give you an example of the product, the singular product in New Brunswick that absolutely drives me insane that we sell in grocery stores from outside of this country is garlic.
No! I knew you were going to say garlic.
Garlic is the one that we bring in from China en masse. We shipping container garlic from China to this province. Everyone can grow garlic. I mean, literally every person who has even a window box could grow garlic. But anyone with a little bit of a yard can grow their own garlic.
Why are we importing garlic?
Honestly, I don't have an answer for that, because there is no reason.
One, why are we importing garlic? Two, why are we importing garlic from China?
Yeah.
I looked at it. That was one of the things I looked at the grocery store, and you see the normal style. You can get elephant or music garlic that is Canadian grown, beautiful. And then you get the really tiny ones that come in the 3-pack from China. It's cheaper for some reason. Yeah.
I have to assume, and this is not even a good enough reason, but I have to assume part of the reason is regular access to supply. But I mean, garlic stores incredibly well in our climate. There is absolutely no need that in January or February there isn't enough locally grown garlic to go around. I've also seen it from Egypt in a grocery store in New Brunswick. So, I mean, that is the one. Why? And it's probably cheaper to buy from your farmer or from your farmer's market. There is no reason other than convenience, other than it's there in the grocery store when you pick up everything else you're making for supper.
There are two statistics with regards to the grocery store and just production in general that really bug me. Is that 58% of food grown in Canada gets wasted. And that goes along with the whole process. You've got from the farm makes a fraction of it. It goes to distribution network, goes to distribution centers, and then finally to the stores. And I've seen perfectly good produce and food turned away at the grocery store because of one reason or another.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes they turn it away because it's too big, too small, too whatever, not perfect.
They're looking for uniformity, yeah.
And then on top of that, with regards to the pesticide use, herbicide use, if we were to stop using those and all of those artificial inputs, synthetic inputs, we would reduce our crop yields by about 50%.
Sure. Yep.
So in my mind, if we were to be more efficient with the usage of our produce that we do grow, because if we are, let's say 60%, if we're losing 60% during that distribution network, but then we were to move towards more regenerative practices and lose the 50% on top of that, kind of comes out in the wash.
Yep.
Why aren't we doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, we have definitely looked at gleaning programs in terms of how do we recoup, especially for what's in field, not just food waste in general, but what's in field. I have a meeting this afternoon with ESIC, which I'm not going to remember what the acronym is. Do you know what it is? It's the New Brunswick Economic Security. No, it's Economic Social Inclusion. Social Inclusion Corporation. That's what it is. They did consultation last year on poverty reduction in New Brunswick. I think they had 10 times more response than they anticipated, which is not surprising. And one of the things that came up was around food security, number one, and the question around gleaning, number two. How do we reclaim the food that we're losing, especially on farm? Now, I think there are a couple for-profit businesses that do address this. I think in Canada it's called Odd Bunch. Has kind of a box program that addresses some of those, misshapen, maybe not perfect or oddly sized products that, might get missed in a regular production. But I'll give you another example. A field that I drove by today outside of Waterville, I don't know how they had set their racking tables for potatoes, but potatoes this big, there were 10,000 left in the field. And those are perfectly edible, perfect potatoes that people could be consuming, but they just went through their grates and we're all left.
I talked to a producer about that last year and how years ago you'd have families go through the field and you'd pick them, and because he was even saying the same thing, that like there's so much left over that there's potential if people wanted to come pick them. And that should really be something, I don't know who needs to organize that or how it needs to be organized, to make a weekend of you go out and with 100 people, you could pick pounds of potatoes, like you say, perfectly good potatoes to be able to utilize.
So, I mean, I think we're getting there. I think the conversation that we're having today with ESIC and with the Department of Agriculture is trying to build on that. Now, who runs it and how it works, those are complicated things, but I think there is going to be more effort made there. There is a lot of good work, let's say, by Food for All and Food Secure Canada on preventing food waste within the home. I think one of the biggest pieces, and this comes back to this strange North American system that we have, is around food preservation. We've lost a lot of our knowledge and skills on preserving our food and keeping our food to last. I'm sure you, as someone who grows food, is regularly freezing or canning or drying, finding ways to make that food last the rest of the winter or the year. And the Community Food Mentor program that Food for All does has some really great access on training and upskilling and learning, some of those skills. But that's a big piece, the education piece on what to buy and how to preserve it and, how long it'll last.
That goes back to the social and cultural aspect of it, and that's like another conversation I've had with others here, that people don't know how to do that, don't know how to preserve, don't know how to, even I spoke with the director of our local food bank recently, and she said there was a gentleman that came in that was pumped that he learned how to make toast for the first time. He was, I think he was 18 years old. And that's a story I hear over and over again. Like there was a girl we had working with her autistic son, and she said that she doesn't make food. Like she burns pasta, and so she buys Subway for every meal. She'll buy a big one at lunch and then eat it for dinner time. And it's like, not to shame those people, but it's that lack of education of like our great grandparents, especially coming out of World War II, knew that. That was just inherent, and that was something that I believe mostly you see it coming out of the US, like the victory gardens that they promoted. And that's something that, given our economic status now and the way that Canada struggles and New Brunswick struggles, you would think that that would be more of a push. Whereas it seems more to be, and like we talked about earlier, the issue of throwing money at problems and hoping that it solves it. The subsidies and just like, here, let's throw more money and try to figure out if this works, rather than that the PR or public education with regards to, hey, you can be self-sufficient at home.
Actually, so I'm going to talk about our convention. We are hosting convention in New Brunswick for the first time in the history of the Union. It's never been here before. It's November 19th, 20th, and 21st. We're very excited. The theme is Food Sovereignty Justice, Building Collective Strategies. Our keynote speakers are Charlie Angus and Britt Griffin. But part of the reason that I want to mention this is Thursday evening we have La Famille Leblanc coming to provide Acadian Celtic music for us, and they are fully self-sufficient. That family, who plays music as their job, runs a fully self-sufficient farming operation, where they just keep all of their own food and buy all of their own food have on farm. So, I mean,
Are they New Brunswick based?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Where are they out of?
Maybe Grand Barachois. Yeah. So, I mean, it's possible. It's not unrealistic. It does take a lot of work and effort, but it also does take support and reduction of barriers, as we talked about, for sure.
It's that education portion. And it's something that we've been very passionate about over the last number of years, of like educating people of the small thing, like canning, making jams, making
Salsa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is the easiest way. Last year, I spoke to a friend about growing a garden for the first time. They were struggling with their grocery bill for their kids, and they said they didn't want to grow tomatoes because they don't like tomatoes. And I was set aback by that, because I was like, you don't like ketchup, pizza, pasta, spaghetti. Like all of those different pieces go into it. And so if people don't understand where those come from, or you necessitate buying that from the grocery store, which you're paying for packaging, you're paying for distribution, you're paying for all of those extra little pieces.
Processing, shipping, and handling. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Ketchup is an interesting example. So my grandmother had a PhD in nutrition. She put herself through 3 degrees during the Depression by raising chickens in Illinois. She was a home economist, like, extraordinaire. You could not. She was the penny pinchingest person I've ever known in my life. And she made her own ketchup and canned her own ketchup when my mom was young. You know, it's all possible. And we have more technology and tools today to do it than we ever used to.
And that's even, well, you saw the construction we've got out front. We're building a little learning center to be able to bring people in and educate, because with regards to canning, anytime I post about our pressure canner, everybody's like, I'm scared. It's a bomb in my house. I don't want to use it. It's like, look, that's been done for generations. People have canned, and they know how to do, like, do they blow up sometimes? Yeah, it happens. But if you do it improperly, it's the same with anything.
Yeah, I got forced into making my own salsa because I can't buy it without chili or jalapeno in it, which from Crohn's disease I can't have anymore. So I every year make a batch or 2 or 3, depending on how ambitious I am, and just can it, and then I have it for however long until the next tomato season. I would prefer not to, but I do because it's a food that gives me a lot more choice in my food access. So, I mean, I think the piece here too, you know, around that education is realistic in what people's ability are, as we talked about training, but also how many New Brunswickers are working 2 or 3 jobs to keep their own livelihoods. They don't have time to can. So, I mean, that's another social pressure that's part of, you know, well, it's great if you know how, it's great if you have the produce, But if you don't have that time, it doesn't make a difference.
That comes back to the regulatory problems, though, because we've run into that with regards to wanting to share what we do. And we've run into those issues with the health inspector where it's a no, you can't share certain things, or you can't sell certain things, because I would want to do it for not for a profit, I guess, to be able to pay our own bills. But it's something that we keep running into, is those regulatory issues of like, I want to share and I want to help, but it's something you have to do under the table. You don't talk about it, you just barter or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about Crohn's disease? Yeah. About your experience and what is Crohn's?
Oh boy. So Crohn's is inflammation in the digestive system. So I actually have Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. I have both. They're inflammatory bowel diseases. They're caused by an autoimmune response. So your immune system thinks that your small and large intestine are, foreign bodies that they try to attack and remove. And I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis in 2017. I was diagnosed with Crohn's in 2023. I spent a month in the hospital. With that, I needed emergency surgery. In that instance, that was the 4th trip to the ER that I made in 6 weeks. The 3rd trip, I finally got medication to help. It's chronic illness is such a burden for everyone involved. The fatigue that comes along and the pain, chronic pain associated with chronic illness. Inflammation in the bowel. So that can cause bleeding, it can cause diarrhea, it can cause constipation, it can cause, Crohn's disease is from mouth to end. So any part of your system, so stomach, esophagus, can also be affected.
Is it genetic?
Yes and no. There is definitely genetic inheriting factors, which I learned after I was diagnosed, that both sides of my family have real bowel problems. That was a nice surprise. But there is a trigger, and we haven't identified the trigger. So you might have the genetic the DNA factor that makes you more likely to get Crohn's or colitis, but we don't know what starts it in some people and not others. For example, why do some of my cousins have problems and the others don't?
And it's largely related to what you consume then.
That's only a factor for a flare-up. So what I eat, what I can't eat, only affects base level symptoms. It's not going to start or stop the illness. That, as far as we know, has no trigger on the whole thing starting up. We're learning a lot about, and coming back to agriculture, epigenetic transgenerational inheritance, especially in pesticide, and that showing up many generations down the line and causing problems many generations down the line. So looking at that, I wouldn't be surprised that if something like that shows up with Crohn's disease, for example, but we don't know yet. There's just not answers.
There's a lot of interesting social commentary with regards to the differences in, especially things like wheat. People who are celiac or can't consume wheat, but then we've even had people who buy our sourdough that have a inflammatory response for store-bought, but they could have our sourdough. And I'm like, look, I'm not going to tell you you can have sourdough, and I don't know what the difference is or claim to know what it is. But if you can eat it fine, I think there's something in there that tells you there's an issue.
Absolutely. And the thing with my kind of digestive disease is it changes day to day. So I can eat something yesterday that'll be totally fine. If I eat it tomorrow, it may not sit well. And I don't know from day to day how that is actually going to go. There are foods that I generally don't eat because I know they're going to provoke a reaction. Popcorn is my favorite food. I can no longer eat it, which really sucks. But it just depends. You just take it, not even day by day, minute by minute.
What do you mean you can no longer, like, was it one day you could and one day you couldn't?
No, that's one where I know guaranteed because it's insoluble fiber that to break it down in my system is going to cause me a lot of pain and a lot of problems. So I just don't. I haven't tried. I know someone with Crohn's who's peeled it. If you take off the kernel, because that's where the real problem is. They said it was fine. I haven't been brave enough to try that, but someday I will.
Because that's interesting with regards to the epigenetics and the back to wheat is people who say that they or people who've gone to Europe and have European bread or cheeses or whatever, they can really consume those as opposed to they come back to North America and they consume it and they're like, oh, I'm lactose intolerant, I got the runs, it's just ruined me. They feel lethargic, they feel garbage, but having it over there is different because it would be a different cultivar, different pesticides and things that are being used in the cultivation.
Yeah, the farming practices in general are different. I think they also do a lot more work on maintaining heirloom varieties. And, you know, again, our focus on export and yield and monoculture has driven down that nutritional value in our wheat products. I'm not saying Canadian wheat is bad. It is just harder to digest for a lot of people, myself included. I have a wheat intolerance, so I can have a little bit. I can have regular pasta, no problem, once a week. But if you gave me a slice of bread, I could not eat it. I know it would just cause me problems. I can eat it, but it's going to cause me a lot of problems later on, so I don't, just to make my life easier.
And that again comes back to the issue of trying to get the highest yield as possible rather than focusing on something that's of greatest benefit.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I would recommend if anyone wants to, there is a great restaurant in Rogersville called Alma Snack Bar, and they're using Italian flour. They bring in flour from Italy for their pizza, and I can eat that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's such a weird, with regards to food and cultivars, it's something that I'm so passionate about the homegrown and local food, but then also the food systems that we currently grow food that looks pretty and will ship. And there's a lot of foods that couldn't make it from here to the grocery store, let alone here to a truck to the grocery store. And so there are many people that have never experienced what real food actually is or tastes like because you buy it from the grocery store and it's a perfect bell pepper. And it's that coming back to the education portion of being able to get that news out there, that education out there of there are other options. And then we could feed more there have been studies, and that's something I spoke to an organic farmer last year with regards to the benefits of organic grown produce have more micronutrients and nanonutrients to be able to feed you so you stay fuller longer as opposed to a grocery store tomato that is just not the same.
Yeah, for example, for myself, I can no longer consume traditional strawberries. The pesticides on them really set off symptoms. So if I buy organic, I'm okay on just that one product. But yeah, it can make a real difference for someone with any digestive issue, but just in general, you know, access to that and easy access to that. Yeah, makes a huge difference.
Do you believe, I know we mentioned that it's kind of largely genetic, but is it a sort of chicken and egg scenario where we have those epigenetics or those genetics in your case that can cause it, but you could have been fine if we didn't have those pesticides, if we didn't have those cultivars, if we went back to more traditional practices as opposed to the corporatization of this large-scale agriculture?
Yeah, it's possible. Again, we don't know what the trigger is on a lot of immune response. We know something is setting it off. And yeah, I would be suspicious that there's a lot of those environmental factors that we have added to our bodies, PFAs, that we are finding all over everywhere. You know, we don't know what that's doing and how that's triggering things in our systems. So yes, I would be very suspicious. We don't know yet. I hope in my lifetime we know and might have a cure. But at this point, I'm on Remicade, which it technically controls the tumor necrotic factor in your bowel, but that's basically just telling your immune system to slow down, to stop. But that also means that my immune response for other illness and disease is much lower. And therefore, I'm very cautious. Very cautious. I got pneumonia in 2021 after being fully isolated. So I just don't trust that I'm not going to get sick.
It's not worth it.
No, it's not. Well, and that's the other thing. I'm sick enough day to day with Crohn's disease. I'm not in remission. So I don't need more. I don't need anything else, whether that's measles or COVID or, anything. No thanks.
Yeah, I really wish we could get more of the word out to be able to educate people about these things. 'Cause it's something we speak about on a regular basis, and then trying to compete with multi-million dollar, sometimes $100 million marketing budgets to promote grocery stores. And the large-scale agribusiness is so sad to see the misinformation and miseducation that people are subjected to on a regular basis that really is ultimately detrimental to their health.
Yeah, I mean, I can't fault anyone for going to a grocery store, especially, like, as I say, if they're working two jobs, maybe they don't have access to a vehicle regularly. Farmers markets tend to be once a week. There's lots of pieces of the system that need to do better to make food access better. And, a lot of people, especially in Carleton County, are at such a level of poverty that even talking about fresh food is unrealistic. So, we advocate for a universal basic income. That has worked really well. Newfoundland has done a really great pilot of that in the last couple of years.
Did they really?
Yeah. Yep. Government led. I think we can make shifts and changes to make people healthier, food more accessible, farming more sustainable. We talked about farm income. Farm debt has doubled since the year 2000. That's a huge burden on our farmers. And, when you look at that negative 1% farm income, people are going to go, well, how do farmers keep going? Why do they bother? It's because 65% of farms rely on off-farm income to keep their farm going. So that's one or more of the people working on the farm at another job funneling that income into the farm to keep it going. That's the only way. It's the only way that we've been able to exist as small farms. So, yeah.
I've seen that a lot lately. My prime example that I like to use is you've got the realtor and the carpenter that have a small farm, and then they claim that they're farmers, which they often are.
Yeah.
But then it's using that alternate income and really being self-employed in other avenues to be able to support doing that.
Oh, I could list you off of our membership. We have a prison guard who farms. I have a security guard who farms. I have a husband whose wife owns a pharmacy, and he runs a farm. There
are people who are passionate about food and food production that won't let it go because it's so important.
And honestly, that's what most small-scale farmers are. It's a lifestyle. They are passionate about it. They're not doing this for fun. They're not doing it to make money. They're doing it because they believe in food production and they want to feed people. I mean, at the end of the day, they want to feed people.
We started growing food, or I really started growing food in 2020. Everything shut down.
Yep.
And I started a garden, had no idea what I was doing. And along the way, like you mentioned, everything that I grow is like, holy crap, taste this. Like I see a neighbor, I mean, you see how close the road is. I see a neighbor driving by on an ATV and I'm like, take the zucchini, try it. It's unlike any other zucchini you've ever had.
Yeah.
And so never being really privy to that. Like I grew up, my parents were nutritionists and they were health coaches, but we never had a garden. Yeah. And now I tried a real grape for the first time a couple years ago. And I was like, this is cotton candy on a vine. How is this real? This isn't a store-bought little globe grape that gets shipped in.
Yeah, from Ecuador.
Yeah. And so few people have experienced that. And that is why we struggle of like, I don't want to sell my produce. I want to give it away because it's so delicious and doesn't taste like you have a store-bought tomato. It's so bitter and doesn't taste like a tomato that is sweet and ripe, fresh off the vine.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing, just as a very small piece to mention, so we're a founding member of La Via Campesina, which is an international peasant movement worldwide. It's actually with La Via Campesina that we helped create the concept of food sovereignty.
What is food sovereignty for those unfamiliar?
Yeah, let's answer that because I figured it would come up. Okay. We participated in the declaration of Nyéléni, which happened in Mali in 2007. And we also were part of the driving factor with La Via Campesina in the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Peasants and Indigenous Peoples working in rural areas. So food sovereignty boils down to that food is for people, not for profit, that we value and respect food providers and their rights. We localize food systems and implement fair and just trade policies, that we localize control over all aspects of the food system. So that includes territory, water, seeds, markets, knowledge, technology, that we build and support traditional and indigenous knowledge and skills, and that we work in harmony with the non-human world. So that's what food sovereignty boils down to in, a list of ways that we can practice it. But it comes to people having a choice and a right to access to food and culturally appropriate food. And, we're not suggesting the entire global trade system shut down. And it's not going to happen even if we did suggest it. But, we want to support the small scale farmers in Mali who may be growing products for the export market. What we don't want is their only market to be the export market and their only crop to be the crop grown for export. We want them to be food sovereign as well. So it needs to be an ecosystem that works together. We have extra goods to export that we can sell, great, but are the people in New Brunswick hungry? It has to be both. We have to be working from both, but starting with that people are fed.
When is the AGM again?
So our national convention,
yes,
is November 19th, 20th, and 21st in Moncton. Our AGM will be next spring. It's going to be in this part of the province and probably March or April.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah.
Hopefully people get educated a little bit and we can change some things, enact some change, maybe get a couple more interviews to have more conversations with people, because this is important to get the word out with regards to food sovereignty and education around food.
Exactly.
Because it's such an important part of people's health and general well-being.
Yeah.